Good afternoon. Today we're going to look at Lucy Unveiled, Bad Examples of Evolution. I want to show you a couple of things like what we showed you out of the last presentation. Some really fascinating things in God's creation that just scream, I'm here. Hebrews 11:3, all creation is made of invisible elements. It's fascinating to me always, the second time I showed this in this series, that the Bible would know that. It's God talking to us. How did this was written 2,000 years ago, and yet how did they know about atoms and molecules and all this invisible stuff that we are made up of? They had no clue about that at that point. What holds us together according to the Bible? What holds us together? Scripture. Think Scripture. We are held together by the Word of the Lord, by the Word of God. That's what Scripture says. According to science, we are held together by a molecule called laminins. The pastor had a ADHD moment about 3 months ago. During a sermon, my wife was questioning me about this, he said, ooh, and he had a side about laminins. Most of the people in the room didn't know what a laminin was. A laminin are molecules which attach to your cells. You have 60 trillion cells in your body. And the thing that holds your bones together, your flesh together, your organs together are linchpin molecules that hold the cells upright. If you didn't have these laminin molecules in between your cells, you would simply collapse on the floor like a big blob of jello. Our whole structure is built on these laminin molecules. They are the linchpins, the glue that holds us together. Who's seen a laminin molecule? Yeah, this is what it looks like. Do you think it is any accident that the linchpin molecule that holds us together looks like what? The cross of Christ. I don't think that's accidental at all. I think the Word talks about it, that we are held together by Christ's Word, and that it is revealed in nature. Something that I'm going to only just briefly talk about is the Cambrian explosion. Supposedly, according to conventional dating, 500 million years ago, you had a period of time from 500 to 520 million years ago where every major phyla, and that means every major body form, except for us, came into being in the lower rock strata. There was no transitional forms below it, no half and halves. They didn't even have a whole lot of worms below this. It's as if everything popped into existence all at once. Now, what does that sound like? Sounds like creation. It sounds like the 6 days of creation. For evolution, is this a problem? It is a huge problem. It is a huge problem. And in point of fact, there's a video by Discovery Institute called Darwin's Dilemma that only talks about that huge problem. The problem that 500 million years ago we have geological evidence that everything just popped into existence. And this is what the Cambrian explosion is all about. It's huge evidence for creation. It's God in the rock saying, I created just as I told you I did. Psalms 139, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. Well, we as believers believe in His creation, believe in the beauty of what He's done. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who don't believe that. Titus 1:10 and 11. For there are many rebellious people, mere talkers and deceivers. They are ruining whole households by teaching things they ought not to teach. Whoa. Folks, I submit this is exactly what we're seeing in our public schools, in our public areas, and in our homes today, is that they are being so inundated by sex, no God, and that you are an accident of nature and you are only responsible to yourself, that's what our society is believing as a whole. Central to that is this stuff about missing links that you came from an ape, and I hope we can debunk that tonight. Anybody see a member of your family tree here? This was very tough for me because after teaching 32 years, there are certain students that I kind of wondered about whether they were the missing link or not at times. But again, what's interesting here is this, folks. You've only got a couple of these that actually are the truth. That is who? Homo sapien man. This is who? Neanderthal, who actually existed, Cro-Magnon who actually existed. Other than that, guess what else in this whole list is actually a picture of something that we actually know existed as a human lineage? None of it. None of it. I'm going to demonstrate that to you tonight. Let's take you on a journey of the several types of missing links. One of the first one was Java Man, found on the island of Java. 1891, Dr. Eugene Dubois, this guy's an evolutionist, and he joined the Dutch Sumatra Army. You talk about committed. This guy joined the Dutch Sumatra Army simply so he could travel the world and look for fossils. In Java, he finds a skull cap and femur. Now a skull cap, and this is it, this thing was in the neighborhood of 900 cc's. If you don't know brain capacity, 900 cc's is ape size. We are in the neighborhood of 1,500 cc's. He finds a skull cap and a leg bone, a femur. They were found 50 feet apart. A year later, 70 feet away from these two, he found 3 teeth. Now, what he didn't tell everybody was, first off, just before I tell you anything else, what is the guarantee that these things found a total of 120 feet apart are from the same organism, from the same animal? There is no guarantee. It's possible, but I'm going to make it worse here in a moment. All of these 3 things were found in a till drop, which means they were found in an old riverbed. How does that influence you? It is now almost guaranteed that these things were washed from different places. At the same level of find, at the same level of strata, he found 2 human skulls. Can you have the great-grandchild at the same time as you have the great-grandfather? No. So this is big problems. And none of this stuff about it being a till drop or finding the other skulls was revealed. The skull caps, again, were estimated at 900 cc, which is ape-like, along with other extinct animals. Well, once he finds this, he declares this a missing link. Half ape, half man. He does a world tour with his find. In 1900, 9 years later, another person made a mold of his find, which is what we're seeing here. And there's much debate about it, criticism. Because of this criticism, he withdrew his finds and stopped touring for 20 years. But what got him back out in public was pride. 1920, due to public pressure, he brought back out his find. And the reason for this is because of the discovery of what they called Peking skulls, which we're going to deal with in a moment. And at that point, they said, okay, he's just Homo erectus. What he found, what Dubois found, was just another form of Peking man, so that's old stuff. And he said, no, mine was more gibbon-like. Public again declared it Homo erectus, the same as Peking man. Dubois said it was not the same. This is one thing you'll always see about people who discover things. As I told you before, when you're a geologist and you're an archaeologist, it's tough. When you find a fossil, what do you usually find? Clams. And if you dig next week, you'll probably find clams. And you dig next month, and you probably find clams. And on the rare occasion, which is usually less than 1% of the time, you might find a piece of a bone. So when you find something, do you think it's important? Yes. And so when they just start being told, well, your find's just like anything else, they really get defensive about that. He said his was more gibbon-like. In 1922, he reveals the other finds and the characteristics of the site, that it was found in a till drop, that they were 120 feet apart. Today, his finds are seen as just a giant gibbon. Note the time cycle. This is going to be important because you're going to see this with each and every type of missing link. A find is made and a press conference ensued. We have found the missing link, they'll declared. 30 years pass before it's debunked, but by that time the career of whoever found it is made. We're going to see that cycle over and over again as we go through this. Put that down, you fool. It's a bone of contention. Folks, we're going to look at a lot of bones of contention. When archaeologists dig up a bone, of course they get excited, but do they come with labels on them saying what they are and how old they are? No. So one of their great challenges is from just a piece of bone or a part of a skull or whatever they have, is to get a picture of what the thing actually looked like. So very often they will take this to an artist, and does the artist get a concept of what it looked like? Yes, they will, and they'll draw a picture or make a sculpture of it. But do the artists always agree on what these things look like? Oh, almost never. This is a skull cap of a Cro-Magnon. What is all this white stuff? Fill in, plaster of Paris. From this skull cap, another artist made a mold of what this guy looked like. I got a question for you. How much of this is science and how much of this is artwork? Everything in the front of the face is what? Artwork. This is not science. This is not science, and I'm going to point that up again and again. Imagination is not observation. Science is supposed to be about what we can observe, prove, demonstrate through experimentation. Neanderthal man. This was found around 1900 in the Neanderthal Valley near Dusseldorf, Germany. A single brutish, hunched-over skeleton was first found. They declared him an ape man. Now, the interesting thing about Neanderthals is, I told you that humans have a 1,500 to 1,600 brain size capacity. Guess what the brain capacity was of a Neanderthal? 17 to 1,800 cc's. They should have been brighter than us. Archaeologists, paleontologists will debate this and say, no, they obviously were dumber. Wait a minute. Every time, with this exception, every time they find an animal and they say, okay, this one has an 800 cc brain capacity and this one only has 200, which one do they declare brighter and more advanced? The bigger the better, until they get to Neanderthal, because it doesn't follow their story. Just to prove what I'm talking about, here are 6 artist interpretations of what a Neanderthal looks like based on the bones they found. Are they in good agreement about what Neanderthals look like? They got no clue. They are all over the map. This guy right here, could this be a modern human? Yeah, one of the most interesting, actually, most of them could if they just get a haircut. One of the most interesting things, I was doing a presentation like this about 15, 17 years ago to a group of doctors. And their comment was fascinating when I showed them Cro-Magnon, which I just showed you, which is another supposed missing link, but is really human. And Neanderthal here, who I'm going to reveal to you is human in a moment. And they said, you know what? Homo sapien skull you showed me, the Neanderthal skull and the Cro-Magnon skull, one doctor commented, he said, I've had all 3 of these skull types walk into my office this week. Folks, is there a lot of variation in Homo sapien, in us? There is, and with them trying to support that this is all missing links based on this, is really pushing the credibility of the science. More skeletons were found in the Neanderthal Valley, and they were completely human. Evolutionists say that humans, or Homo sapiens, coexisted with Neanderthals. Well, if they did, knowing that the Neanderthals had bigger brains, who should have won out? Who should have survived? Should have been them, not us. Further inspection showed the first skeleton had rickets and arthritis. So he wasn't just a bent-over ape. This was a human being. When do people very often get rickets and arthritis, especially arthritis? When they're older. Neanderthals had a larger brain than modern humans. Our heads continue to grow till death. Did you know that? Now, we don't grow much. There is a very small amount of growth each year in your head. Maybe not the rest of your body. In point of fact, with impaction of your spine, once you get up in the 80s and 90s, what starts happening? You start getting shorter, but that's not because you're losing height. That's because your spine's getting messed up and that kind of stuff. But your head gets a little bit bigger. If we could live to 800 or 900 years, could it be bobblehead time for us? It might. Well, wait a minute. Were there people in the Bible that actually lived 800 or 900 years? Is it possible that their brain capacity got that much bigger during that period of time? It's possible. We might be looking at the oldest humans. These Neanderthals also had outpointed teeth. It is rare for 90 and 100-year-olds to keep their teeth, but if they do, guess what they start doing in their 90s and 100s? They start to outpoint if they don't lose them at all. Again, this is just supposition. Could we be looking at some of the men of old, and especially the people who were born after the flood who lived to ages of 6, 7, 400 years and things of that nature. We could be looking at the oldest humans according to biblical accounts. Mr. Neanderthal forgets to RSVP with Noah. Is that why he missed the boat? Probably not. In point of fact, we've just made the point that it's very possible that Neanderthals are just what? Regular humans that were very old. Peking Man, named because this find was near Peking. In 1920s and 1930s in Zhoukatian, China, 25 miles from Peking, first a single tooth was first found. I'm glad you mentioned a dentist, because by the time I get through with the next 3 or 4 topics, you're going to think it's nothing but dentists here, because there's a lot of teeth involved. This discovery was declared an ape man by Dr. Davidson Black. Notice, how much did they find to start with? A single tooth. We found the ape man. From a single tooth. That's fascinating. Now, supposedly later, they found 147 teeth, 30 skulls, and 11 lower jaw bones were found in what they called the lower cave. Only 2 human teeth remain from all that. Everything else that's supposed to be the half and half, supposed to be the missing link, supposed to be half ape, half man, was all lost during World War II, during the occupation of China by the Japanese and Americans. Supposedly there was 20 or so Peking Homo erectus skulls found in the lower cave. There was a lower cave and an upper cave at Zhoukatian. Supposedly there were 10 or so human skulls from the upper cave. Now, one of the things about these skulls from the lower cave is they were all broken up into pieces, and when they found them, they had to put them back together. Incidentally, during this period of time, and still today in Africa, what is one of the favorite delicacies of indigenous people with monkeys around? Monkey brains. So, they're telling a story that these were the half and halves buried underneath the humans who are on the top half. Even if all this stuff existed, which we have no evidence of because all of the finds are gone, this could simply be good evidence of human beings trapping monkeys and having dinner. Interesting thing about Peking Man is, here's a reproduction. Again, we have none of the original stuff. These are all molds which were made at the time because we have none of the original bones. But from these molds, they have drawn a complete picture of their family, their environment, and how they lived. Folks, this has some supposition to it with having to fill in the plaster of Paris. What's this? That's artwork. Do we know what their family structure was? Do we know what their total diet was, or how they lived, or how they dressed? We have none of that from actually no bones, because all the bones are gone. And you've really got to see how far they push this stuff. Nebraska Man, 1922, Harold Cook found a tooth. This was misinterpreted by Dr. Henry Osborne of the American Museum of Natural History as an ape-man tooth. They called a press conference and declared, "We found an ape-man fossil." Now, when they pushed this, they acted like we found, the whole skeleton. What did they find? One tooth. This one tooth, known as Nebraska Man, was pushed by Darrow in the Scopes monkey trial. If you don't know about the Scopes monkey trial, in 1925 in Dayton, Tennessee, there was a trial to see whether they can continue to teach just creation in the Tennessee public schools. They had a law called the Butler Act, which said you cannot teach evolution in our schools. You must teach creation. This went to trial with a guy named John Scopes, who was a teacher who did a test trial on this, and it became a media circus. The leading defense attorney of the time was Clarence Darrow, and he was hired by the ACLU. This was only their second case ever. And the case was prosecuted by William Jennings Bryan, who had run for president on several occasions and lost on several occasions. Bryan did something weird during this trial. He got to the witness stand and testified as the prosecuting attorney. And Darrow questioned him about the Nebraska Man and said, "Hey, they found this skeleton out here that's half man, half ape. How do you explain that?" And Bryan said, "I got no clue." Now, of course, Darrow was not telling the truth. Had they found a full skeleton? No, they'd found a single tooth. Brian, again, was not told of the evidence, and it was implied it was a full skeleton. This picture appeared in the papers in 1922 in the Illustrated London News. We have a full-scale drawing of the guy and the other Nebraska men around him and the environment he lived in. They got this all from what? One tooth. How much of this is artwork? All of it. 10 years later, a jaw was found in the same area as the tooth. The tooth fit perfectly into the jaw. The jaw and the tooth belonged to an extinct pig. A pig made a monkey out of the scientist. Folks, again, the cycle goes on. They can find as little as a tooth or a piece of a bone. They declare it an ape man. They have a press conference. That archaeologist's career is made for the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years. But by the time it's debunked, we're chasing another one. And his career is made. Piltdown Man. This is a total fraud. 1912, Charles Dawson, who called himself an amateur fossilist, found a partial skull in Piltdown, Sussex, England, which is why it's called Piltdown Man. This was a very old-looking human skull. It also had canine teeth, unlike any other, and an ape-like jaw. These teeth were very sharp. They were not like an ape's, and they were not like a human. Ooh, they said, ooh, well, this isn't like anything, so this must be half and half. Dawson declares it a transitional form, which means a missing link. He has a press conference. 50 people did anthropological dissertations on it. Over the next 40 years, 45 people will get their PhDs in anthropology based on the work that they do on Piltdown Man, on this one skull set. In the 1950s, the last doctoral student to do it did an analysis. He did a fluoride absorption test on the skull cap, which was very yellowed. The skull dated to about the time it was found. The skull dated to be only 40 years old when he did this fluoride absorption test. This called the find into question, so the teeth were examined under a microscope. They found they had been filed. What this guy had done was he got an ape-like jaw, filed them, got a human-like skull, paired it with an ape-like jaw, yellowed it with chemicals, and sold it, and for 40 years his career was made. And 45 people got their PhD studying this fraud and didn't figure it out to the last guy. Hi, my name is Freddie the Ape Man. I'm 21 million years old. The other day I was evolving when Cecil the ventriloquist paleontologist could make the evidence say anything he wanted it to say. Folks, that's what we're seeing here again and again. It's based on interpretation. This is not about imagination. It's about what the evidence actually says. Cambrian man declared a transitional form between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens by evolutionists. Now remember again what that doctor told me 17 years ago. What's he seen walk into his office? Cro-Magnons. So you're now saying that the people walking into your office are some kind of subspecies missing link? Some of them may act like that, but they're not. Characteristics are identical to modern Europeans. Oh, now we can get into real trouble. The next time you tell a Frenchman or a German they're Cro-Magnon, you're probably going to start a war. They're not going to be happy about that.
Hey, Scott.
Yes?
If I remember right, within the last 9 to 12 months, there have been some tests done as far as like the integration of the two species of Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal, and the conclusion is that everybody now in the European area does have some of the Neanderthal genes.
They all do, and we got Neanderthal genes. There was an intermixing of all of it, which again is their story. Our story is Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, Homo sapien. Guess what they are? The same race. They're human. This again is a picture of a Cro-Magnon skull and a bust of what they came up with. Some finds have outpointed teeth like Neanderthals, which could suggest what? Extreme age. This again could be due to the great biblical ages. They had highly developed societies, highly developed language and art. Again, is there anything different here than Homo sapiens? It's not. And they had virtually the same brain capacity, about 1,500 cc's. Australopithecus. I dare you to say that 3 times in a row real fast. That takes some practice. Several finds. The first was by Raymond Dart and then the Lakeys. The Lakeys were a famous couple that did a lot of anthropology work in the mid-1900s. 1924, Raymond Dart finds Australopithecus africanus. He had a press conference. We found the ape man. Dart found an unknown species. It had 500 cc brain capacity. That's not even ape size, that's monkey size. It had ape-like skull and jaws, but it has strange teeth. Now notice, I didn't say it has human teeth or even dog-like teeth, it just has strange teeth. Again, the dentists are getting involved. Along with Australopithecus, there was another guy found called Ramapithecus that was supposed to be below him, that was supposed to be closer to the apes, but halfway between an ape and Australopithecus. And the Australopithecus was put just ahead of Ramapithecus, another extinct ape. Both had totally ape-like characteristics. Notice, what does this guy look like, human or ape? But why have they sat him up contemplating whatever's in front of him? To make him look thoughtful. This is where the artwork comes in. Lucy, you've probably heard of Lucy. Lucy is known scientifically as Australopithecus afarensis. This was found in 1974 by a guy named Richard Leakey. This was the Leakey's son. It was interpreted as a transitional form, which means a missing link, by Donald Johansen, who's pictured there. This was a 40% find, and that really is about normally what we find. We almost never find a full skeleton. 40% is pretty good. It had a gibbon-like skull configuration, but no snout. When a gibbon is fully mature, they have a snout that comes out, but when they're a young youth, they have a very flat face like a human. Here is a drawing of the pieces that were found of Lucy, or supposedly found of Lucy, because you're going to find out that this piece and those pieces are debatable, as is that piece. From these pieces, here's a fully formed skeleton of Lucy. What are all the white you see? Artwork. It's where they filled in the pieces. Do we know that that's what she looked like? No, it's pure supposition because we don't have the rest of the pieces. We don't have 60% of the skeleton. But that does not stop them from doing what? Drawing in the St. Louis Museum, they have a full mock-up of exactly what she looked like, and guess how they've drawn her feet in spite of the fact that we don't have any foot bones? Perfectly human, to make her look more human-like. Okay, here's another picture of Lucy. Oh, wait a minute, that's the wrong Lucy. Skull fragments were found 1 mile away. Wait a minute. From the rest of the body, the skull fragments that I showed you were found 1 mile away. What are my chances that those even belong to the same animal? Very poor. When they asked Johansen why he paired these things from 1 mile away with the body bones, he said, well, they looked anatomically the same. How would you know that? That was excuse the language, a BS answer. A toe was found 10 miles away. What are the chances of those being the same? I'm going to guarantee you right now, no. Lucy's knees was found 10 miles away in strata 200 feet deeper. What's it supposed to mean, according to paleontologists, if something is buried 200 feet deeper than something else? It is hundreds of thousands of years older. They pieced this together from an area 10 miles by 10 miles across like a jigsaw puzzle and said, here's half human, half ape. Well, it's half something. Lucy was under 3 feet tall. They had a press conference was held. They said, we found the missing link, half human, half ape, and touted as an upright Australopithecine with no snout. Again, it could have just been a young gibbon. Their 3.5 million year dating does not jive with evolutionary time scale. It should be around 1.8 million, so their dating is questionable. The no snout, again, is consistent with a youthful gibbon. Here's what killed Lucy. When they did a computer analysis of her leg, it showed she could not walk upright, and that was supposed to be the whole deal about Lucy. Lucy's whole thing was she had kind of a flared out hip, and maybe this is where we got to be able to walk upright. Not that the hip was real good for walking, it was just different. But when they did a computer simulation of her, they found this out. When gorillas have femur bones, they're very straight, whereas humans have a diagonal to our bones. That diagonal gives us the ability for the weight to rest on our bones at that angle, at a support angle. Guess what shape Lucy's femur bone was at? It was straight. Could she have walked upright for a short period of time? Yes, just like any other ape, but it would have been difficult for her, and computer analysis shows there's no difference between Lucy and any other ape. So all you're doing is looking at an ape. But it took us 20 years to get that computer analysis and to debunk this find. 1 Timothy 6:20, so turn away from the godless chatter and opposing ideas of what is falsely called knowledge. Folks, you've heard from people, well, we've proved men came from the apes. You've looked at a good piece of the data right now. What have they proved? Not a blooming thing. Not a thing. Genesis 1, then God said, let us make man in our own image and in our likeness. Does the Bible tell a very different story than us evolving from some lower primates? It does. It says we were made very quickly in His image with purpose. It's not just humans that they have these half and half missing links with. Archaeopteryx is supposedly the half and half for birds. One of the few evolutionary examples of transitional form, this supposed link is between reptiles and birds. He has some reptilian structures. He has bones. He has bones which are not hollow. He has teeth. He has extended fingers on the ends of his wings. But he has an asymmetrical layer of fully developed feathers. That means he has perfectly good feathers, and this guy was a good flyer. If he's the missing link halfway between reptiles and birds, should he be a perfectly good flyer? No, he should be kind of sorry at it. But this one guy was a good flyer. His skull was very bird-like, and there's no transitions above or below him. But here's what really killed Archaeopteryx as a transitional form. He was found in Jurassic strata dated 150 million years ago. However, fully developed birds were found in the same strata, same time he lived. Should we find the grandparent and the grandson in the same level? No. But what's worse is we found the grandson below him. 75 million years earlier, we were finding fully developed birds. So he doesn't even fit in the correct place. This can't be a transitional form. Thus, evolutionists Gould and Eldridge say it's a strange mosaic that doesn't count. So throw out their one half and half for birds and reptiles. Horse series. Eohippus was a small three-toed runt. This is supposedly where horses started. Basically, Eohippus was a rat. Around 120 million years ago, he evolves into Merchippus, which is one toe with two declining. He evolves into Equus, which is our modern horse with one big toe and none others because they've gone away. When this first came out, this was what looked like great evidence for evolution because they had this little runt animal that had three toes. And then in Merchippus, the toes were on the decline, as you can see here. And by the time we get to Equus, the horse, we have what? Only one toe, which we call a hoof. Great evidence for evolution. Except, all these excellent examples, the geologic column does not support them. They are found upside down in the strata. Guess where we found Eohippus, this rat? On top, in the middle, on the bottom, and he still lives today. Okay? Where did they find Merchippus? They actually found him in the middle, but guess where we found Equus, modern horse? On the bottom, in the middle, on top. Can the grandson be existing at the same time as the grandparent? It's not right. It doesn't fit. And so any honest evolutionist doesn't even use this today. Sadly, when the Darwin exhibit came through the Whitty Museum 2 years ago, they had an exhibit of the horse series, which was terrible science. Let's talk about what we've seen in this presentation about missing links. The horse series was first proposed in 1874. By the time they took a look at where we're finding all these finds, and it was found that it was upside down in the rock strata, it was disproved by evolutionists in 1944. But during that, how many years? 70-year period, was this touted as great evidence for evolution? Yes, until it was disproved. Java Man, 1891, 30 years later, they figured out it's what? A gibbon. But for that 30 years, Dubois' career was made. Piltdown Man, found in 1912. By 1950, its founder was dead. He didn't care anymore. but it was proved to be a total fraud. But 45 people had gotten their dissertations studying this thing about how it added to archaeology. Peking Man in the 1930s, by 1946, all that's left is 2 human teeth. Do we have any evidence of these skulls whatsoever? None. Nebraska Man, what did they find in 1922? A single tooth. 10 years later, they found it was a pig's tooth. Lucy was found in 1974. By 1990, when we were able to do computer simulations, we found out the thing can't walk. What continually happens with these? They find a skull, they find a piece of bone, they find a tooth, they declare it's a missing link, they have a press conference, their career is made, and what happens 20 to 30 years later? We prove it was just an ape. It was nothing whatsoever. Folks, this is just a sample. Are there a whole lot more out there? Yeah, there's something called Artie, who really looks weird, and others that I don't have time to go into. But the point is made. When they start saying we have good proof that you evolved from a chimpanzee or from an ape, it's not the truth. It's all in their imaginations. Now, let's show you some more bad examples of evolution. Cows and moths. Cows is my favorite story. From cows to whales. This is actually one evolutionary point that they were trying to push 30 years ago. Did whales come from cows? January 1987 Weekly Reader. What's a weekly reader? Think about that one. Is that what we'd give our kids? Yeah, I grew up reading a weekly reader. 1987 Weekly Reader came out with the fact that they had found a whale skeleton, kind of a weird-looking whale skeleton in the middle of Canada. So their supposition was if he was found in the middle of Canada, he must have walked his way from the ocean. This whale walked his way from the ocean? No, give me a simpler answer for why they found a whale skeleton in the middle of Canada. There was a great flood and he got buried there when the water receded. The development of whales is a huge problem for evolution because whales and porpoises are what? They're mammals. All other fish are not. And so how did you get the descent of these sea mammals? Their first idea, they evolved from cows based on teeth and milk production. Cows have teeth about that size. If it's not a sperm whale, guess what the size of a normal blue whale is? They're this size. But they're the same shape. And so they said because they have the same shape and because they produce the same type of milk, they must have evolved from one another. Today, they have gotten away from saying cows did it. Now they say wolves turned into whales. And here's their half and half drawing of what a half wolf, half whale looked like that used to be kind of amphibious and go into the water quite a bit. Here's my problem with their drawing. What have they got of this half and half? They have the back of a head bone and they have a piece of the jaw they put together, and from these two pieces they've drawn this. Question, how much of this is artwork? Almost all of it. And do we have any guarantee whatsoever that these two pieces even belong to a half and half between wolves and whales? None whatsoever. Again, the theorized logic is that they became sea amphibians, land mammals, and then went back to the sea. The pseudo-evidence of whale fossils, hundreds of miles inland that I talked about, again, you gave a better explanation for it. The more logical answer is the Noachian flood. Now just look at what happened to a cow. Now I know cows are one of the dumbest animals on the planet, but do you really think they just hung around the water so long that they started growing tails, that they started growing flippers, eating that seaweed and stuff, and they just hung around out there long enough for them to become a whale? Number one, genetically it's impossible. But two, it defies common sense. Peppered moths. If you can't see it, that's a light white moth right there, and that's a black moth. There's a white moth there along with a black moth down here. These peppered moth examples are given proof of evolution. I'm going to show you this does not prove evolution, it proves natural selection, which are two different things. This is given as proof of general theory or macroevolution. There are two types of moths, light and dark, in 19th century England. Before the Industrial Revolution, the lights were predominant. Before they started cranking out all the soot and stuff during the 19th century in England, there was about 90% white moths and 10% black moths. It is thought that light tree trunk provided camouflage from their enemies when they were white moths, and that's why there were so many white moths, and the black moths would show up on the light tree trunks. But with the Industrial Revolution putting out all that smog, the dark, which usually were spotted easily on those light trees and eaten by birds, after the Industrial Revolution, there's a massive amount of pollution, and with the darker tree trunks, who shows up now? The white moths, and they get eaten. Today, in Britain, guess what there is? There's not 90% white and 10% dark anymore. Now what is it? 95% dark and 5% white. However, they're both still what? Moths. The genetics have not changed. What has changed is the environment they live in, and they're still moths. They're still moths with the same genetics. It's just natural selection has said the area is better for this one than that one. They haven't changed genetically. Again, 45 years after the start of the Industrial Revolution, there's a huge shift in the moth population, now 95% dark. This does not prove evolution, but could prove survival of the fittest. Again, I give that this is good evidence for natural selection, which creationists believe in. How do animals adapt and change a little bit based on an environment? Via natural selection. But one animal does not change into another, and this does not show that. It could prove extinction, survival of kinds based on natural selection and adaptation to an environment. A tenet shared by macroevolution and by variation or creationism. It fits in Blyth's special theory and into the creation model. The problem for evolutionists is, the truth of the matter is, these moths don't like to get on tree bark. They'll get onto buildings, they'll get onto plants, but they don't like to get onto tree barks. Do you know what they had to do for these pictures? They had to capture and kill the moths and paste them onto these trees. So these aren't even natural pictures, which is not good science. The moths don't light on tree trunks, and these samples were pasted. So what do we see about natural selection? Natural selection is a force of nature, but it is one that does not prove evolution, but does fit within the creationist model. Natural selection equals variation, and we think that things vary. God pre-programmed into their DNA the ability to vary, as we saw with the beaks of the finches on the Galapagos. Mutations, whenever they occur, are loss of information. Once you lose information in a species, it cannot get better, it can only get what? Worse. Species are not the same as kinds. One of the things people will always charge about the ark is, well, they couldn't have put all those animals on the ark. And of course, one of the best questions you can ask somebody who says, well, they couldn't put all the animals in the ark is, how many animals did they have to put on the ark? I don't know, but they couldn't get them all on. Okay, how big was the ark? I don't know, but they couldn't get them all on. Well, that's somebody who's really not talking to all this, because when we start talking on kinds, we're probably talking at the genus or family level, which means on the ark they probably only had to get somewhere between 2,000 and 4,500 kinds of animals on the ark. And that would have only filled up less than 19% of the ark. If you take a worst case scenario and say, okay, they had to get 16,000 kinds on the ark, that would have filled up 37% of the ark. Macroevolution has never been observed. I use a big word there, let me define it. Have we ever seen a cat turn into a horse? Have we ever seen a bird turn into a reptile? Or vice versa? No. We have seen things change. A rat turn into a different type of rat. We have seen dogs be bred to be different types, a little bit different type of dog, but we have not seen a dog turn into a cat. This natural selection does not demonstrable in the fossil record. Very often, as I told you before, when they find a skeleton, boy, archaeologists go off and say, I found the missing link. Folks, well, as I'll show you with dinosaurs in 2 weeks, Deinonychus, Velociraptor, and maybe Compsognathus were probably all the same kind, but they were 3 very different what? species of dinosaur. There were probably only about 50 to 55 kinds of dinosaurs. It could easily be the Deinonychus and Velociraptor were just species within the Tyrannosaur or Allosaur kind. All we see is extinction, not the creation of new kinds of DNA information. Have you seen any time within your life, ooh, there's a newly created species of dodo bird, something we've never seen before? You don't see that. But what are the ecologists always complaining about? Extinction. That there's so many species going out. We're blowing away the earth because of extinction. From a creationist point of view, God made this world perfectly at the start. We have now screwed it up some. So guess what? You cannot just have by chance new information. So when we blow up an environment, or the world blows up the environment simply because it's a fallen world and things go extinct, is that what we'd expect in a fallen world with the creation story? We would. DNA. What has been decoded? Because you will hear that they have DNA evidence that you evolved from a chimp. 92% of the human DNA has been located. Now notice I say located. They still don't know what 98% of that means. All they have found is where the 4 base code chemicals are in the DNA strand. The 8% of telomere ends was not decoded because with a huge amount of hubris they said, well, we already know what those end caps mean. They don't. It was once thought that as much as 98% of the genome was what they call junk DNA. The ENCODE project has disproved that. The ENCODE project proved that at least 80%, if not 100%, of what they used to call junk DNA are not what they call genes, are not things that code for chemicals and for proteins within a cell. What they are is genetic switches that tell the cell when to do something, when to make a chemical, when to send it here. They are the computer hardboard for the cell. And again, probably 100% of it is functional. This was huge for evolution because evolution only made sense when they said 2% of your DNA codes for you and the other 98% is all random junk. We've now found out that it's 100% functional. What would the creationist have thought had to be true? That it would be 100% functional, which is what we're now finding via the ENCODE project. Your DNA has 3.1 billion codes for our trait, structure, growth, functions, birth, life, and death. Basically, you have 4 chemicals, T, A, G, and C, for thiamine, cytosine, adenine, and guanine, that are put together in this double helix strand, which can be hundreds of feet long, wound up into your cell. And these 3.1 billion computer codes describe how to make you. Incidentally, a male human has 3,080 million base codes. A female has 3,120 million base codes. Ladies, you have 40 million more base codes than males. My wife will never let me forget the fact that she's more complicated than I am. The original estimates were that we differed from chimpanzees by 1.2 to 2%, or about 40 to 60 million base pairs. But when this analysis was released, here's part of science. When people release their results, what do other scientists do? They go check their findings. They go try to repeat the experiments and verify the data. When we looked at their data after 3 sets of post-trials, they found this, that actually the difference between human and chimp DNA was closer to what? 30% different. With this new data, here's the conclusions we can say about chimp and human DNA. Evolutionary reports of human and chimp DNA being almost 99% identical are grossly false. Let me put that another way. It's a lie. To get those results, they had to ignore 98% of both genomes. What they did to say we were only 1 to 2% different was they only looked at the genes, which is about 1.2 to 2% of our genome. They said the rest of it's junk, so we're going to ignore it. And then, when they found a piece that was completely different from both of them, they threw that one out. And once they threw everything out that was dissimilar, they said, okay, we're 99% the same. But they only counted the pieces that were the same to start with. In truth, under the best conditions, DNA from ours and chimps are 30% difference, which means we almost have 1 billion base codes different. 1 billion base codes. Can you write a very different computer program with 1 billion different characters? You can. We did not evolve from chimps. Psalms 139. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. Is that what we're really looking at? That we are fearfully and wonderfully. We did not happen by accident, no matter what some false teachers will say.